The queen stepped down from her horse. Slowly, deliberately, the whole village bowed low. Every head touched the ground, every head except one. A girl sat alone by the goat pen. She did not look up. She had learned not to hope. The queen walked past the bowing elders, past the feast table. She walked straight toward the girl and the goats. Behind her, the whole village went silent. No one understood why. Not yet. 2 years earlier, Nala's father was a good man. Everyone in the village of Eleri said so. His name was Kwame, and he had loved 2 women in his life. The first was Bisi, Nela's mother, who died when Nela was only 7 years old. The second was his daughter, who had her mother's eyes and her mother's gentle way of speaking to everyone, even strangers, as if they already mattered to her. Bisi had been sick for a long time before she died. Kwame remembered every day of it. He remembered how Nala, still a small child, would sit by her mother's mat and hum softly, the way Bisi used to hum to her. "Take care of your father, Bisi," told Nala on her last night, "and never let anyone tell you that you are less than what you are." Nala did not fully understand the words. She would understand them later, in ways her mother never wanted for her. For 3 years after Bisi's death, it was only Nela and her father. They were poor, but they were happy. Kwame farmed a small plot of land at the edge of Eleri, and in the evenings he told Nala stories by the fire, the same way his own father had told him stories. "Tell me the one about the leopard and the river again," Nala would ask, nearly every night, even though she already knew every word of it by heart. "You know this one already," Kwame would say, smiling. "I like hearing it in your voice," she would answer, and he would tell it anyway, because there was very little he could refuse her. Then Kwame married again. Her name was Mama Zuri. She came from a village 2 days' walk from Eleri, and she arrived with 2 sons of her own, Toby and Kaode, both a little older than Nela. If a story like this speaks to something in you tonight, tap like and subscribe before you keep watching. There is a girl like Nala in every village, in every family, carrying a weight nobody else can see. We tell one of her stories here every single week. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been treated unfairly by someone who was supposed to protect you? At first, Mama Zuri was careful. She smiled at Nala in front of Kwame. She spoke kindly when others were watching. Nala, still young and still hopeful, believed her father had found someone who might love her the way her own mother had. She was wrong, but it would take time for the truth to show itself. The change came slowly, the way most changes do. A sharp word here, quickly softened with a smile. If Kwame happened to be watching, a smaller portion at dinner explained away a simple forgetfulness. Nala noticed these small things, the way children notice far more than adults ever expect them to. But she said nothing, telling herself that her stepmother was still adjusting to a new home, a new family, a new life. Kwame died 2 years after the wedding. A fever took him quickly, the way fevers sometimes do, and within a week he was gone. Nala was 15 years old, and for the second time in her short life, she buried someone she loved. She remembered sitting beside his mat during those final days, holding his hand the way she once held her mother's, listening to him grow quieter with each passing hour. On the last night, he managed only a few words, his voice barely above a whisper. "Be good to your stepmother," he told her. His last real wish, spoken with the same trusting heart that had led him to marry Mama Zuri in the first place. Nala promised him she would, not knowing, in that moment, exactly how much that promise would cost her, or how completely Mama Zuri would fail to honor the same understanding in return. At the funeral, Mama Zuri wept loudly in front of the whole village. She wore black cloth and let herself be comforted by every neighbor who came to pay respect. That same night, once the guests had gone and the compound was quiet, Mama Zuri looked at Nala across the room with an expression the girl had never seen on her face before. Cold, certain, final. Things will be different now. Mama Zuri sighed. It was not a warning. It was simply a fact, delivered the way one might announce that the rains were coming. Nala did not yet know what those words would cost her. She would learn within days. The first humiliation came exactly 1 week after the funeral. On the evening, Mama Zuri told her, in front of Toby and Kaode, that she was no longer welcome at the family table. "You eat outside from now on?" Mama Zuri sighed, not even pausing her stirring of the evening soup. "This house has too many mouths already, and I did not agree to feed a stranger's daughter forever." Nala stood in the doorway, waiting for her stepmother to laugh, to say it was only a joke born of grief. The laugh never came. "But this was my father's house," Nala said quietly, the only protest she would allow herself. "I have always eaten at this table." "Your father is gone," Mama Zuri replied, still not looking up from the pot. "And this house belongs to whoever has the strength to run it now. That is me. Take your bowl outside." Toby and Keod said nothing, glanced briefly at Nala with something that might have been discomfort before quickly looking away, unwilling to challenge his mother in front of anyone. Nala took the bowl. The goat pen sat at the edge of the compound, a fenced square of packed dirt where the family kept 6 goats for milk and meat. It smelled of dung and old hay, and it'd become from that week forward the only place in the household where Nala was permitted to eat. Mama Zuri gave her a wooden bowl, cracked down one side and mended badly with twine, and told her it was the only bowl she would ever need. "You eat what is left," Mama Zuri said, "after the family has finished. Not before. What was left was rarely much cold cassava, the hardened edges of the soup pot, sometimes bones with barely any meat clinging to them. Nala learned to eat quickly and quietly before the food could go completely cold, sitting on an overturned bucket among the goats while the rest of the household ate together inside, their laughter drifting out through the open windows. Toby and Keod, still young enough to think cruelty was simply a game their mother had invented for their entertainment, took to mocking her openly. They would stand at the fence and make loud chewing sounds, or ask her in front of visitors whether the goats minded sharing their dinner table with her. "Does it taste better with flies on it?" Coyote asked once, laughing so hard he nearly fell over. Nala said nothing. They began calling her Goat Girl on the road to the market, a name that spread through Ileri faster than Nala could have imagined a single unkind word could travel. One market day, a trader who did not know the family offered Nala a piece of fruit, mistaking her for one of the many children who ran errands for their households. Before Nala could even thank him, Keod appeared and told the trader loudly, "Don't waste good fruit on her. She eats with the goats at home. She probably prefers it that way." The trader looked confused, then embarrassed, and quietly took his fruit back. Nala walked the rest of the way home with her eyes fixed on the dirt road, saying nothing, feeling the shame settle over her like a second skin she could not remove. Toby, older and slightly less cruel than his brother, sometimes seemed uncomfortable with the games Keod invented at Nala's expense, though he rarely did anything to stop them. Once, after a particularly harsh round of mockery near the well, he lingered behind as the others walked away and said, quietly, almost as an apology, "He doesn't mean all of it. He just likes making people laugh. It doesn't feel very different, whether he means it or not." Nala answered, and Toby had no response to that at all. He never apologized directly, not in 2 full years, but he also, from that day forward, quietly stopped joining in whenever Keod's games grew especially unkind. A small, silent distinction that Nala noticed even if she never mentioned it aloud. There was an evening, not long after, when a distant relative of Quame's passed through Ileri and stopped at the compound to pay respects to his memory. Mama Zuri served a fine meal inside the house, laughing warmly with the visitor, while Nala sat outside with her cracked bowl, close enough to hear every word of the conversation drifting through the open window. The relative, at one point, asked casually after Quame's daughter, clearly expecting to hear she was thriving under her stepmother's care. "She is well," Mama Zuri answered smoothly, without a flicker of hesitation. "Resting early tonight?" "You know how young girls are." Nala said nothing, sitting quietly in the dark just beyond the light spilling from the window, absorbing one more small lie told easily, and without consequence, one more reminder that the truth of her life mattered less to the people around her than the story Mama Zuri preferred to tell about it. Visitors to the compound learned quickly not to ask about the girl who ate by the fence. Mama Zuri had a way of changing the subject so smoothly that most guests simply followed her lead, choosing comfort over questions, the way people often do when the truth is inconvenient. Only one thing kept Nala from losing herself completely in those months. Among the 6 goats in the pen was an old, thin animal named simply the Grey One by the family, too weak now to give much milk, kept alive mostly out of habit rather than any real usefulness. The other goats often pushed the Grey One away from the feeding trough and Mama Zuri had long since stopped bothering to make sure it got its fair share. Nala began giving the gray goat a portion of her own food before she ate anything herself. It became a small, quiet ritual, repeated every single evening, regardless of how little food she had been given that day. "You need it more than I do some days," she told the goat once, scratching gently behind its ears while it ate. "But I still have more than you have. That has to count for something." She did not do it to be seen. No one was watching except the goats themselves. She did it because it was in the middle of everything that had been taken from her. One small thing she still had the power to give. There was one small exception to the loneliness of those months. An elderly neighbor named Mama Runk, who lived just beyond the compound wall, had known Nala's mother years before, back when Bisi was still a young bride new to Aleri. Mama Runk never confronted Mama Zuri directly. She was old and alone, and had no real power to change what happened inside another woman's household. But she found small, quiet ways to soften what she could not stop entirely. When Nala walked past on her way to fetch water, Mama Ronk would call her over and press a small piece of bread or a boiled egg into her hands, always glancing toward the compound first to be sure no one was watching. "Your mother once did the same for me, when I had nothing," Mama Ronk told her once. "I have not forgotten it. Some debts take a long time to repay." Nala treasured those small exchanges more than she could say. They were, for a long stretch of those 2 hard years, the only proof she had that kindness still existed somewhere in Ellery, waiting quietly for its moment to matter again. There was one week, deep in the rainy season, when Nala fell seriously ill with a fever that left her too weak to stand for long stretches at a time. Mama Zuri did not call for a healer, insisting the sickness would pass on its own, and Nala spent those difficult days shivering in the animal shelter, the goats pressing close around her as though sensing she needed the warmth. It was Mama Ronk, noticing that Nala had not appeared at the well for 3 straight mornings, who finally intervened, marching into the compound and demanding, in a voice sharper than anyone had ever heard from the quiet old woman, that something be done. "That child will die of neglect in this house," Mama Ronk said, "and everyone in Ellery will know exactly whose door to lay it at." Mama Zuri, unwilling to risk the kind of talk that might follow a death in her care, reluctantly allowed a local healer to see Nala. Though she made certain everyone understood, she considered it an unnecessary expense. Nala recovered slowly, nursed as much by Mama Ronk's quiet visits as by anything the healer provided, and the fever left her with a clearer understanding than ever of exactly how little her life was worth in her stepmother's eyes. By the time a full year had passed, Mama Zuri's cruelty had grown bolder, no longer content with simple exclusion from the family table. "This girl is cursed," she began telling neighbors, quietly at first. Then with growing confidence, as she noticed how easily the village accepted whatever she said. "Her father sickened and died not long after I arrived. Bad luck follows her like a shadow. I only keep her out of Christian duty, nothing more." At the village well one morning, Nala overheard 2 women repeating Mama Zuri's words, as though they were simple fact, nodding to each other with the particular satisfaction people find in a good piece of gossip. "Better to keep your children away from her," one of them said. "You never know what kind of misfortune might rub off." Nala said nothing. She filled her water pot and walked home in silence, carrying the weight of a lie she had no way to disprove, since the only person who might have defended her was the same person telling the lie in the first place. It was a convenient story, one that painted Mama Zuri as patient and long-suffering rather than cruel, and Nala watched with quiet despair as it took root in Ellery, repeated at the well at the market in whispered conversations she was never meant to overhear but somehow always did. The final cruelty arrived on the night Mama Zuri decided that even the veranda where Nala had been sleeping since her exile from the family table was too generous a comfort. "You'll sleep with the goats from now on," she announced, as casually as she might announce a change in the weather. "Since you already eat with them, it seems only fitting." Nala did not argue. Arguing had never once changed anything in the 2 years since her father's death, and she had learned to save her strength for the things that still mattered. The animal shelter was cold at night, and the packed dirt floor never grew comfortable, no matter how many times she tried to arrange herself against it. She lay awake some nights, listening to the goats shift and breathe around her, finding strangely, more comfort in their quiet presence than she had found in the house that used to belong to her father. The cruelest moment came during the village harvest feast, the largest gathering of the year in Ellery, when every family brought food to share and the whole community ate together beneath torches strung between the trees. Mama Zuri made certain Nala understood, well before the feast began, that she would not be joining the celebration. "Stay with the goats," she said. "I won't have people asking questions about you tonight, of all nights." Nala had grown used to exclusion by then, but something about the harvest feast made this particular cruelty sting more sharply than most. It had been her mother's favorite celebration once, and Kwame used to tell her stories about how Bisi would dance until her feet ached, laughing louder than anyone else in the village. One of Nola's stepbrothers, Kaod, noticed her sitting alone near the fence as the feast began, and rather than leaving her be, he decided the moment called for one more performance in front of his friends. "Look!" he called out, loud enough for several nearby villagers to hear. "The goat girl is sad. She can't dance with the goats tonight. Maybe someone should teach her the steps." A few of his friends laughed. Nala kept her eyes fixed on the ground, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted, though her hands, hidden in her lap, had curled into tight fists. Mama Runk, watching from a short distance away, opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, glancing nervously toward Mama Zuri, who stood watching the whole exchange with a faint, satisfied smile of someone who had trained her son well. He was dressed plainly, his face weathered from years of travel, and nothing about him suggested he was anything more than another passer-by seeking a warm meal on his journey. He noticed the girl sitting alone by the goat pen, apart from the celebration, and he watched her for a long moment without approaching. Something in the careful, patient way she carried herself, even in complete isolation, seemed to catch his attention. He said nothing. He simply watched. And then, as quietly as he had arrived, he continued on his way down the road that led toward the capital. Nala never knew he had been there at all. She did not know either that the old traveler was no ordinary passer-by, but one of several quiet scouts Queen Amina sent each year to walk through the smaller villages of her kingdom, watching for anything worth her attention, reporting back only when something truly caught his notice. What he wrote in his report to the palace was brief. A girl living apart from her family, sleeping among animals, treated with open cruelty by the woman who ran the household. He did not know her name. He did not know her history. He only knew that something about her situation deserved a closer look. And Queen Amina, reading his account weeks later, made a note to include Eleri on her next inspection route through the region. It was, in the end, nothing more than one careful man noticing one small unfairness and choosing not to look away from it. That single choice would change the entire shape of Nale's life, though neither of them would understand the connection until much later. That same night, alone among the goats after the feast had finally quieted, Nala allowed herself something she rarely permitted anymore. She let herself cry, silently, into the rough fur of the old gray goat pressed close beside her. "I don't know how much more of this I can carry," she whispered, so quietly that only the goat could have heard her, if goats could understand such things at all. "But I don't know what else there is to do except carry it anyway." She thought of her mother's words, spoken so long ago she could barely trust her own memory of them. "Never let anyone tell you that you are less than what you are." She did not feel, most days, like those words were true, but she held on to them anyway, the way a person holds on to a rope in deep water. Not because they are certain it will save them, but because letting go feels like the greater risk. By morning, she had wiped her face, fed the animals, and returned to the quiet, careful rhythm that had carried her through 2 difficult years. Whatever tomorrow held, she had learned, could only be faced one small task at a time. The news reached Eleri on an ordinary morning, carried by a rider who arrived at a full gallop and delivered his message to the village elders before continuing on to the next village on his route. "The Queen is coming. She travels through this region within the week, inspecting the villages under her protection. Prepare accordingly." Illyri had never received a royal visit in living memory, and the news sent the entire village into a frenzy of preparation. Paths were swept. Walls were freshly whitewashed. Every family began planning what food they might offer, what gifts might be appropriate, what impression they might make on a queen who had never once set foot in their small corner of the kingdom. Nala heard the news the same way she heard most things now, secondhand, drifting to her through the compound wall as Mama Zuri excitedly discussed preparations with a neighbor. For one brief, foolish moment, something like hope stirred in her chest. Some half-formed thought that perhaps a queen's presence might mean fairness might finally find its way to Ileri. She dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it arrived. Queens did not concern themselves with goat girls. She had learned, over 2 hard years, not to let herself hope for things that had no reasonable chance of arriving, since the disappointment afterward always cost more than the hope itself had been worth. Mama Zuri threw herself into the preparations with more energy than Nala had seen from her in the 2 years since Quam's death. She dressed Toby and Keod in the finest cloth the household could afford, and she spent an entire day arranging her own appearance, determined that the family would be remembered favorably if the Queen's procession happened to pause in Elariat at all. She even had new mats woven for the doorway, and she instructed Toby and Keod Moritan on exactly how to bow and exactly what to say if the Queen happened to speak to them directly. Not once, in all the preparation, did she mention Nala's name, as though the girl living in the goat pen had simply never existed at all. On the morning of the visit itself, Mama Zuri paced the compound anxiously, adjusting her son's clothing for the 3rd or 4th time, muttering under her breath about all the ways the day might still go wrong despite her careful planning. She had waited 2 years for a chance to prove her household's worth to someone important, and she was not about to let anything spoil it now. "You," Mama Zuri said to Nala, not bothering to look at her directly. "Stay with the goats. I don't need royal eyes seeing what doesn't concern them." Nala nodded. She had long since stopped expecting anything different. On the morning the royal procession finally arrived, the entire village gathered along the main path, bowing as the Queen's escort came into view. Guards in ceremonial dress, and at the center of it all, riding with quiet, unhurried dignity, Queen Amina herself. Dust rose from the road as the procession approached, and children who had never seen a horse so finely dressed stared open-mouthed as the guards passed. Even Mama Zuri, for all her careful preparation, found herself briefly speechless at the sheer scale of the royal entourage, far grander than anything Ileri had ever hosted before. The village elders had prepared a formal greeting, a small feast, and a line of families eager to be noticed by their sovereign. Mama Zuri positioned herself and her sons near the front of the gathering, certain that her careful preparations would finally be rewarded. The Queen dismounted slowly, taking in the village with calm, observant eyes, the kind of eyes that seemed to notice far more than most people realized. The elders stepped forward to offer their formal welcome, and for a moment everything proceeded exactly as Ileri had planned and hoped. Then Queen Amina's gaze drifted past the gathered crowd, past the feast table laden with the village's best offerings, toward the edge of the compound where a goat pen stood half hidden behind a modest fence. She paused. The elders, mid-speech, did not immediately notice that their queen was no longer looking at them at all. What Queen Amina saw at the edge of the compound was a young woman kneeling beside an old, thin goat, quietly offering it a portion of her own modest meal before touching any of it herself. It was such a small, unremarkable act, the kind of small kindness that happens in 1,000 quiet corners every single day, unseen and unremarked upon by anyone at all. But Queen Amina had spent 17 years searching for exactly this kind of quiet kindness, in exactly this kind of quiet corner, and something about the scene made her go very still. Then her eyes moved from the young woman's face to her wrist, where a carved wooden bracelet caught the morning light. The Queen's breath caught in her throat. She knew that bracelet. She had held it in her own hands once, many years ago, before pressing it gently around the wrist of a dying woman's infant daughter and making a promise she had never once stopped trying to keep. Without a word to the waiting elders, without a glance at the feast prepared in her honor, Queen Amina turned and walked toward the goat pen. The village elders fell silent mid-sentence, confusion spreading across their faces as their queen simply walked away from them. She walked past the feast table, its offerings untouched. She walked past Mama Zuri, who stood frozen, uncertain what was happening, her carefully prepared greeting dying on her lips. She walked straight to the fence of the goat pen, where Nala knelt, still unaware that anyone of importance had even entered the village, let alone was now standing directly before her. Queen Amina lowered herself to her knees in the dirt, in front of the entire watching village, and looked directly into the startled, uncertain eyes of a girl who had spent 2 years believing she was worth nothing at all. No words passed between them yet. None were needed. The whole village had gone completely silent, watching their queen kneel in the dust before the girl they had learned from Mama Suri to see as cursed and unworthy. No one understood what was happening. Not the elders, not Mama Suri, not even Nala herself, who could only stare back at the woman kneeling before her, too stunned to form a single word. For 2 years, Nala had learned to expect nothing from the world beyond another quiet meal among the goats, another cold night on packed dirt, another day of being looked past by everyone who mattered. She had built her entire sense of what she deserved around that expectation, brick by careful brick, until she genuinely believed it was simply the shape her life was always going to take. Now, kneeling in front of her, was a queen, and every brick of that careful expectation was crumbling at once, faster than Nala's mind could make sense of it. She looked down at the old gray goat beside her, still chewing calmly, entirely unaware that anything unusual was happening at all, and for one strange, dizzying moment, it was the only thing in the scene that still made complete sense to her. This is the part of the story where I need you to stay with me, because everything that happens next is the reason this story exists at all. If you've made it this far, like this video right now, and tell me honestly in the comments, have you ever watched someone finally get the recognition they deserved after everyone else had given up on seeing it? Queen Amina reached out and gently took Nala's wrist in her own hands, turning it slightly so the carved bracelet caught the light more clearly. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice unsteady in a way that seemed strange coming from someone of such calm royal bearing. "My mother," Nala managed, her own voice barely above a whisper. "She died when I was young. This is the only thing of hers I still have. I never knew what it meant. I thought it was only a keepsake." Queen Amina closed her eyes for a moment, as though absorbing 17 years of searching finally coming to an end. "It is far more than a keepsake," she said, rising to her feet and turning to address the stunned, silent village. "Many years ago, during a rebellion that nearly cost me my life, a woman named Bisi hid me in her own home at great risk to herself and her family." The queen paused, memory clearly moving behind her eyes. "I was young then, barely older than Nala is now, fleeing men who meant to end my family's line entirely. I knocked on the first door I found, half collapsed with exhaustion, and Bisi opened it without hesitation, though she had every reason to fear what harboring me might cost her if I were found. She hid me beneath her own floor for 2 full days, while soldiers searched the village, feeding me from her own family's meager stores the entire time." A murmur moved through the gathered crowd. Mama Zuri's face had gone pale, though she said nothing at all. "Before I left her home," the queen continued, "Bisi made me promise one thing. She said, if her daughter was ever found, she should be treated as family, protected as one of our own. I gave her this bracelet, carved by the royal craftsmen themselves, as a mark of that promise. I searched for years after her death, but I never found the daughter she spoke of. Until today." The village elders stood frozen, beginning to understand, in real time, exactly what had been happening at the edge of their own compound for the past 2 years. "This young woman," Queen Amina said, her eyes moving to Nala with unmistakable warmth, "is Bisi's daughter. She is the child I promised to protect, and from everything I have seen in these few short minutes, she is exactly the kind of person her mother raised her to be." Mama Zuri's carefully constructed story, 2 years in the making, collapsed in an instant, in front of every single person who had once believed it, without question. "Your Majesty?" Mama Zuri finally managed, her voice thin and shaking. "I did not know. I would never have." "You knew enough," Queen Amina said, turning to face her directly for the first time. "You knew a child in your care was hungry, and you let her stay that way. You knew she was cold, and you gave her a floor among animals instead of a roof. Whatever you did not know about her mother does not undo what you chose to do to her." The village elders, standing frozen at the edge of the scene, began murmuring among themselves, the full weight of what had happened in their own village finally settling over them. Toby and Keod stood beside their mother, saying nothing at all, their earlier laughter and mockery nowhere to be found on their pale, stricken faces. Nala finally found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended, still trying to catch up with everything happening around her. "I don't understand," she said. "I have lived here my whole life. I sell herbs at the market. I sleep with the goats. How can I also be someone a queen has been searching for?" "Both things are true," Queen Amina said gently. "You can live a small, hard life in a goat pen, and still be exactly the person your mother hoped you would become. One does not cancel out the other. If anything, I suspect it only proves her judgment of you was correct from the very beginning." Mama Roenk, watching from the edge of the crowd, pressed a hand to her mouth, tears finally spilling freely down her weathered face. 17 years of half-understood history suddenly making sense all at once. Queen Amina did not order Mama Zure punished harshly, though the village elders, now fully aware of the cruelty that had taken place under their own noses, were prepared to see her face serious consequences. Before any decision was made, the queen asked the village elders directly why none of them had intervened in 2 full years on behalf of a child openly mistreated within their own community. The elders had no good answer. One admitted that they had heard whispers of Nala's treatment, but assumed, as people often do, that family matters were best left to the family. Another simply looked at the ground, unable to meet the queen's eyes at all. "There is a lesson in that silence too," Queen Amina told them, "and I expect Aleri to remember it long after I have returned to the capital. A village that watches cruelty happen without speaking against it is not so very different from the one committing it. Instead of harsh punishment, the queen required something simpler for Mama Zuri, and in some ways harder, a full public apology, delivered before the same villagers who had once mocked Nala on her word alone. Mama Zuri stood before the gathered crowd, her face burning with a shame she had never once shown Nala in 2 full years of cruelty, and offered words that came out stiff and reluctant, but public all the same. "I treated my late husband's daughter with cruelty," she said, her voice barely carrying past the first few rows of villagers. "I told lies about her to protect my own comfort. I am sorry for what I did, and for what I allowed my sons to believe was acceptable." It was not, Nala noticed, an apology that admitted to enjoying the cruelty, or even fully understanding why she had chosen it. It was the apology of someone sorry mainly to have been caught, delivered because a queen required it, rather than because 2 years of conscience had finally caught up with her. Nala listened without visible satisfaction. She had imagined this moment sometimes in her loneliest nights beside the goats. But now that it had arrived, she found she felt less triumph than simple, quiet relief that it was finally over. "I do not want you punished further," Nala told the queen afterward, when the two of them spoke privately for the first time. "I only want to stop being afraid of this house. That is enough for me." Queen Amina studied her for a long moment, something like respect crossing her face. "Your mother said almost the same thing once," she said, "about a very different kind of fear. It seems kindness runs deeper in your family than cruelty ever could." Before leaving Aleri that day, Nala asked for one small thing. She asked to see Mama Roenk, the elderly neighbor who had quietly slipped her bread and boiled eggs for 2 long years, always glancing over her shoulder first, to be sure no one was watching. Mama Roenk wept openly when Nala found her, unable to believe that the quiet kindnesses she had offered, certain they meant almost nothing in the face of everything Nala was suffering, had been treasured so deeply by the girl receiving them. "You gave me proof that this village still had some good left in it," Nala told her, holding the old woman's hands the way Mama Roenk had once held hers. "I will not forget that, whatever else changes for me now." Queen Amina, watching the exchange, quietly arranged for Mama Roenk to receive a modest yearly gift from the palace for the rest of her life. A small formal thanks for a kindness that had never once asked for recognition. Nala was brought to the palace within the month, not because of any royal blood flowing through her veins, but because of a promise made 17 years earlier and a debt Queen Amina had never stopped intending to repay. She struggled at first with palace life, the way anyone would after 2 years of eating beside goats and sleeping on packed dirt. She startled at the sound of servants addressing her formally. She found herself missing, some nights, the quiet company of the old grey goat she had spent 2 years feeding before herself. Queen Amina, sensing her discomfort, gave her time rather than pressure, allowing Nala to find her own pace rather than forcing her into palace customs before she was ready. Some days, Nala simply sat in the palace gardens, learning slowly that she was allowed to take up space in a room without apologizing for it. A lesson 2 years of goat pen life had nearly trained out of her entirely. "You do not have to become someone new," Queen Amina told her once, finding her sitting quietly alone in the garden. "You only have to remember that the person you already were deserved better than what you were given." A full formal ceremony was held at the palace 3 months later, honoring Nala not as a lost princess reclaiming a throne, since she had no royal blood at all, but as the daughter of a woman who had once saved a queen's life at great personal risk. Queen Amina herself spoke before the gathered court, recounting the story of Bisi's courage during the rebellion, and formally welcoming Nala into the royal household as a permanent ward of the crown, entitled to its protection and its resources for the rest of her life. Toby and Kayode, now grown, still live in Ileri, working the same small plot of land their mother once managed. They rarely speak of the years when they mocked a hungry girl at the fence. 10 years later, Ileri tells a very different story about the girl who once ate with the goats. Mama Zuri's name is rarely spoken there anymore, and when it is, it carries no pride for anyone who once believed her lies. Nala, now known throughout the region for her quiet fairness and her insistence on hearing every voice before making a judgment, still visits Ileri once a year, unannounced, in plain traveling clothes. She always stops first at the market, buying fruit from the very same trader who once tried to give her a piece of it for free. And Tistim, she makes sure he understands exactly how much that small kindness had once meant to her. On these visits, she also stops at the old goat pen, now home to a new generation of animals, and she always brings a little extra food to share with whichever goat looks most in need of it. "Why do you still do that?" a young palace attendant asked her once, watching her kneel by an animal pen, far from any royal comfort. "Because someone has to remember what it feels like to be the one nobody thinks to feed first," Nala said. "I never want to forget that feeling, even now that I no longer have to live inside it." She still keeps her mother's carved bracelet close, though she no longer needs it to prove anything to anyone. Some Vennings alone in her palace room. She simply holds it and thinks of a woman she barely remembers, who once made a promise strong enough to reach across 17 years and change the shape of her daughter's entire life. She thinks, too, of her father, who never lived to see any of it, who died believing he had left his daughter safely in the care of a family that would look after her. She has forgiven him over the years for the trust he placed so wrongly. He could not have known what Mama Zuri would become once he was gone, and Nala has come to believe that his final wish for her, spoken so gently on his last night, was never really about staying loyal to a cruel woman at all. It was about staying who she was, no matter who tried to convince her she was less. That, in the end, is the promise she kept, even when she did not fully understand she was keeping it. "Why do you still do that?" a young palace attendant asked her once, watching her kneel by an animal pen far from any royal comfort. "Because someone has to remember what it feels like to be the one nobody thinks to feed first," Nala said. "I never want to forget that feeling, even now that I no longer have to live inside it." A person's true worth is not shown by where they are made to sit, but by the kindness they choose to give when no one is watching at all.